to go ahead and get started. So good evening, I'm Keisha Rogers, and I want to welcome you to the LaRouche PAC Strategic Update for Monday, October 25th. And tonight's discussion will be led by Barbara Boyd. Just to give you the highlight of what we're going to be talking about tonight, what our theme is, and I think it's very appropriate to the challenges we're facing in the country right now, is now that we see the evil, how should we define the good? And this is actually going to be a continuation, or should I say, coming off of the class that Benjamin Denniston gave on Saturday. His class, if you did not see it on the LaRouche PAC website, I encourage people to go to the website to watch the class. It's been part of a series that he's been giving, and that we have continued to lay out what's behind the upcoming COP26, the agenda behind the climate scare, and what he called, the title of it was the Malthusian origins of the climate change scare. I encourage people to go to the LaRouche PAC website and look at that. Now, obviously, in the United States right now, we are in a total revolt that has been catalyzed by the movement that the LaRouche PAC and what President Trump has represented, a movement to redefine what it is to be a citizen, what our republic truly stands for, to organize the return to the Republican roots of the nation. And that means that we need a cultural transformation. And so the revolt is coming very strongly from the American people that are looking at the attacks on our nation, the attacks on our children, the attacks on parents, on the family. We've been talking about this very extensively throughout our recent class series. And the question is, how are you going to define a mission, and how will we define what is needed to get out of this evil satanic policy that has been permeated by the Biden collective around the question of wokeism, of gender identity, of identity politics, and really start to define what the future must entail, what type of future we want to bring. And I want to, before I turn it over to Barbara, just kind of give a sense of what that might look like. I don't know if people know this, but just a few days ago on October 20th, something very optimistic happened, and hopefully you were paying attention to it, which is the fact that the program outlined by President Trump to return Americans to the moon by 2024, the Artemis Program, which we call the Mission Artemis, the Artemis generation, now is fully underway. The question is, are we going to make sure that this program is a full success? And there's a lot of opposition to it, but one thing that just happened is that the Orion spacecraft that is going to be flying cargo and astronauts to the moon was just placed on top of the SLS rocket. And this rocket, it is going to be used to fly a uncrewed mission, first of all, around the moon, and it's going to deploy many fascinating science experiments that's going to help us better understand the universe that we live in. Now, you might be saying, some people can say, well, why would we even be concerned about that right now when we have insanity running loose in the country? Well, as we're going to talk about tonight, in this context, what is it going to take to get out of this insanity? What type of mission orientation of optimism can we give our young people to look to the stars, optimism that's needed to provide for a real economic driver, that we're not going to accomplish the mission of Artemis set forth by President Trump as a continuation of what President Kennedy started with the Apollo mission, unless we have the idea that our children should be actually motivated to think optimistically about the future. And so I just wanted to add that this is how we're going to get out of this crisis. And I think Barbara's going to take it even further than that in her discussion on the question of the cultural renaissance and how we address the real revolt that's genuinely happening in the population against these destructive policies, but where we're taking this, where we're going. So Barbara, why don't you go ahead and continue the discussion?
Okay, look, a guy by the name of James Carville, way back when, centuries ago, if you're among our younger audience, when George H.W. Bush was running for president against William Jefferson Clinton. That was a political race which we had a very big role in. On the desk, repeatedly photographed, was our book about George Bush by the Clinton campaign, back at the point where they had not yet become the corrupt sort of people they became. One of the things which James Carville said, which rang very true at that point, and it has some bearing on today, is you had a very similar type of situation where there were all sorts of problems going on, all sorts of reasons to vote against Bush, vote for Clinton, do this, do that, talk about the future of the country. But Carville said, you know what? It's the economy, stupid. That's the center of everything. And the reason why George H.W. Bush lost the election, in most respects, was because of the economic crisis which was going on at that point in time, and the fact that he was so completely out of touch with what was impacting normal Americans, that he actually didn't know how grocery stores operated, never really been to one. It was rife with the same types of statements which the Biden administration is talking about now. There's a Zogby poll out, which shows that 30% of people in the United States right now are skipping meals because they can't afford to eat. And you have this witch, Jen Psaki, up there talking about the crisis is nothing but the crisis of, treadmills not arriving on time for Christmas. And we should lower our expectations and we shouldn't worry about it. And, now Janet Yellen, who as of 2 weeks ago was saying that the effect of the inflation is going to be transitory. Now she's modified that, saying, gee whiz, it could last for the next 2 years. Similarly, you have the rush to get anything done on this so-called social spending bill, so that Biden can go ahead and attend this ridiculous COP26, summit for the Green New Deal, along with 11 other members of his administration and Barack Obama, showing their obeisance to what really is this globalist type of entity, which is what's infiltrated our country ever since August of 1971, infiltrated it to the point where we, in many respects, have almost forgotten what it is that made America great. It is not, as a lot of Republican pundits talk about, going back to something akin to the 1950s. It is very much going back to the longstanding Western civilization tradition, which led to the founding of the United States. It is indeed ironic that Vladimir Putin understands that the fundamental weakness in our country right now is not anything which anybody would think clearly from the news media. It is the fact that we don't understand our own history and our own culture fully enough. And so tonight I thought what I'd do as the opening discussion, and we can talk about it further, is reflect a bit from just by taking a piece from Lyndon LaRouche It's called A Strategic View of European History. Keisha will post it, the full article on the website. But I found that certain elements of that article were particularly relevant to thinking about how we have to think today, going back again to the actual notion of our founding. And in part of that article, Lyndon LaRouche talks about what is meant in the Constitution by the general welfare principle, something which most people probably don't associate with economics. And he says, we in the classical tradition of Solon, Plato, and the Christian apostle Paul are each individually and in our role as society as a whole, responsible for the well-being of each and every person in society. A responsibility exercised by society as a whole, rather within the limits of simpler interpersonal relations. It is the imposition of this responsibility, this accountability, self-imposed upon the society as a whole, which marks the advantage of European culture at its best. The corollary of that is the accountability of each individual for society and its territory as a whole, and the society's reciprocal responsibility for the care of the individuals and the territory as a whole. This dynamic quality of reciprocal functional responsibility is the distinction of the intent of the US constitutional system. This is the system, despite the violation of that system by some US governments and by factional forces within the nation. Now, he goes on to talk about the fact that this really was the history and the intent of our founders. There was no separation of morality, religion per se, and economics. He says, the long-ranging drive of the Anglo-Dutch liberal financial oligarchical establishment, on the other hand, over the period of the post-Franklin Roosevelt period of world history, has been to destroy the institution of the sovereign nation state republic throughout the planet, an intention which has been turned loose full force with the collapse of the Soviet system. The name given to this global destruction of sovereignty of nations, including that of the USA itself, is globalization. So what he's talking about gives a name to something which people otherwise very much know as the globalists, the Bilderberg Society, all of the various recent incarnations, for example, our basic friends here in terms of the, Great Reset, the Green New Deal, the Davos crowd, etc. And he's saying their fundamental drive throughout all of history has been to impose fundamentally a financial oligarchy controlling the activities of human beings, who they don't define in the way that Lyndon LaRouche just talked about it, in the sense that every human being is divine and responsible for everybody else. And if you can have that responsibility, or agape in the Christian sense, towards your fellow man as your life's devotion, you begin to see how society can function at higher and higher levels. That used to be ingrained in the way that, for example, the Massachusetts Bay Colony thought about its existence, in the way that our founders thought about their existence, in the way that individuals thought about the role of the individual in society. Alexander Hamilton, for example, famously characterized it, along with the Winthrops and the Mathers, as the intention to do good. that society exists with the intention to do good for our fellow men and women and to advance them. The characteristic difference of the American system economy is based on the notion that it is labor power and the actual creativity of human beings which makes an economy, not money. It is fostering of that labor power, of raising the physical productivity of labor across the board, which distinguishes the American system of economy, which makes that primary, from, say, the British system, which treats men as so many servile beasts to be maintained for purposes of advancing only the whims of the oligarchs sitting on top of a slave society. Now, in this piece, Mr. LaRouche goes on to talk in one section, which I found very profound. He talks about the moral purpose of economy. And he says, the characteristic distinction of the human species is a process of ongoing change from generation to generation, which is typified in a healthy state of society by scientific, technological, and related progress in the well-being of a growing human population as a whole. This distinction is inseparable from the notion of a certain kind of individual human immortality. The notion expresses the sense that the animal-like aspect of human mortality is only a necessary part of the metagenesis of the human personality and the essential self-interest of that personality. We all die. Therefore, the question is, to what future purpose shall we have lived? This immortality is expressed beyond the bounds of the mortal flesh by those qualities of ideas which transform the quality of human activity in an upward direction, thus elevating the condition and fruitfulness of the existence of the individual and the continuing existence of the immortal humanity of which the mortal life of the individual, as expressed by the ideas which are unique to the human species, is an essential moment of the eternal whole. Any contrary view of the goal of individual life is a parody of bestiality. Unfortunately, the parody is prevalent and the remedy relatively rare. Admittedly, increased wealth in the sense of the individual's increase of average power for good over nature is necessary. However, when this is regarded as a goal in and of itself, the purpose of mortal human life is overlooked and often betrayed. The human species, in its well-informed state of conscious existence, yearns for agreement with the intent of the living personal creator of the universe and hastens to realize that agreement in some feasible, significant way during the course of a lifetime of mortal existence. As the creator changes the universe, we must proceed in like manner. We must produce immediately, above all else, more suitably developed human individuals than we ourselves have represented. We must produce the conditions of life, of human activity, which permits the realization of that intention. Hence, progress, as only typified by scientifically driven physical economic progress in the human condition, seems to be an end in itself. It is not an end in itself, it is the footsteps left by the march of that true higher intention. The greatest satisfaction in living is to know the higher purpose, which requires those footsteps through the passage of time. I urge you to read that. It is a most profound statement in and of itself. The piece, otherwise by Lynn, is a tour de force of all of European history, pointing out to you and making very concrete to you the difference between a society literally based on the notion of agape, of taking responsibility for and loving one's fellow men and women, and therefore embracing a mission to advance society and to advance their creativity and labor power, versus a society which is based on subservience to notions of both the universe and human society, which you have to judge as being completely and totally irrational. You know, people think that economies somehow run by little men under the floorboards rather than by human intention and human creativity and deliberate creation of the good. So when we're thinking about what is hitting us right now, I wanted to really come back to that deeper notion of why and what is the fundamental basis of economy, as most certainly advanced by Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, Abraham Lincoln, Henry Carey, and all the founders of the American system, and most certainly advanced dramatically in overall conception by Lyndon LaRouche. It is indeed very, very different than what anybody is talking about as economics today. People talk about Wall Street as being the metric of economic progress. We're facing now a actual dramatic breakdown crisis caused by the axiomatic assumptions of empire, I would hold, actually fully invading the United States to the point where people have actually forgotten, don't know about, are unfamiliar with the American system, which is a completely different idea. I was thinking today as I was reading this portion of you know, Lynn's statement about the general welfare and the responsibility inherent in that for every human being, but the only place you really find that today is almost in the military, in squads and warfare, where everybody realizes that that type of responsibility means the difference between living and dying. That has been stripped away from us as this warfare conducted by the empire has increasingly destroyed the idea that we're responsible for one another. You know, people look at some of these concepts, I am sure, through a lens of Ayn Rand or the craziness that she represented, where if you're actually inclined to think about the welfare of your fellow human beings and to think about how you're going to raise their level of being, you could be accused of being a silly socialist. And the reality is really quite different. I mean, if you understand the British Empire, you also understand that they created Marxism, and that, you know, behind this whole idea of free enterprise and little men under the floorboards running the economy is an elite which actually has sold people on that while they run things. Similarly, in communist societies, particularly this was true, and Putin even talked about it in his speech at Valdez last week, you have notions of you know, people attempting to talk about love of their fellow men and women, when the reality is that the nomenclatura, an elite, was actually running things, and the ideology was just that, an ideology, something completely false. Our founding, American uniqueness, is really, really totally different from that. And it's what Lynn is getting into when he talks about the general welfare clause in the Constitution. And you can look at all of these things which we see around us at this point. Critical race theory, which has been going on in the schools for a very long time. The bombardment of the nation with drugs, the rock, drug, sex counterculture, as we used to talk about it. The most importantly, the idea that you cannot know or contemplate universal truth. That's why I like the idea that Trump had for naming his new social media station. It flies directly into the nastiness of the present culture, where truth doesn't seem to matter, and you really are taught that you can never figure it out. LaRouche, on the other hand, was absolutely devoted to demonstrating to you how you could prove stuff to yourself and how you could prove notions to yourself through Socratic dialogue, and how you could discover by standing on the shoulders of other original discoverers throughout history, that mental prowess in yourself, which actually allows you to locate the creativity which otherwise exists in every human being. So I thought it important as we went into this particular crisis where the differences could not be clearer. In London today, these wacko environmentalists were actually chaining themselves to the highway, attempting to, shut the entire city down, and basically saying that the United Nations itself came out today and said if these climate goals are not met, if this hysteria, which would drive us back to virtually a feudal existence, as Bob Ingram and Ben Deniston have more than documented, then what is going to happen is we're going to basically be faced with war, famine, the four horses of the apocalypse. The reality is that these people themselves are bringing on the four horses of the apocalypse. And it's really up to us. We've got a huge revolt going on in the United States. The population is awake, wide-eyed at this point. And they've, created a situation in which right now LaRouche's economics can and must come to the fore so that we can build our way out of this mess. And the way we're going to solve it is literally by building our way out of this mess, not by build back better crap coming from this administration, but by actually mobilizing the society to invest in big thinking, big projects, big infrastructure, things which actually will increase the productive power of labor, the center of the American system, the center of Lyndon LaRouche's economics, mobilizing the individual creativity which exists in every human being. So that's how I'll open it tonight, and I hope we have a good discussion.